And I think we are good to start. Um, with this, I should say that good morning, everyone who has joined us as attendees for today's already 10th online webinar of UCAB, which name is Disrupting the Balance, Will the EU Be Better Off Without the Ukrainian Agri-Food Products? Today, I will be your host and moderator. My name is Alexandra Avramenko. I'm the head of EU Integration Committee at UCAB. And I'm surrounded today by very knowledgeable and distinguished gentlemen, out of which all have PhDs, but unfortunately, not all of them have professor's status. Anyways, I'm the only one without PhD today speaking with them. Still, I'm very much passionate about the topic we will discuss. The context of our discussion today is pretty clear. Right now, we are in the process of negotiations between Ukrainian and EU officials regarding the future trade framework and how, let's say, not having a resolution, not having an official understanding what will be the future trade framework between the parties can influence both sides. On our previous online event, we discussed how return to the trade framework, which was in 2021, could influence the Ukrainian side. Today, we did our best to invite the best people who can explain in terms of market analysis, trade analysis, and agricultural policy analysis how the lack of Ukrainian products and how more, let's say, strict access to the EU market for Ukrainian side will influence the EU market. So today, right now, we have with us Alex Lisica, who is the president of UCAB. We also have Professor and Dr. Alphonse Ballmann, who is director and head of Department of Structural Change at Leibniz Institute of Agricultural Development in Transition Economies. We also have Dr. Heinz Strubenhoff, who is an independent consultant of the European Commission and the European Investment Bank. We have Professor and Dr. Martin Banze, head of Tunin Institute of Market Analysis, and we have Professor and Dr. Oleg Nivievsky, who is the Dean of the Faculty of the Graduate Economic Studies at Kyiv School of Economics. With this start, I would like to invite our president, Alex Lisica, to say a welcome speech, and then we will move to the topic. Alex, please.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for a very nice introduction. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to have you here on our next webinar. And we do talk again about the European Union and Ukrainian trade agreement. And as you already mentioned, actually, yeah, we are from a business side very disappointed about the approach which has chosen the European Union about the new trade agreement with Ukraine, because unfortunately, even the middle of May of 2025, we have no idea what's going to happen after 6th of June. And that's a real problem for many sectors and subsectors of Ukrainian agriculture. But I think also there would be a problem for many clients and many consumers in the European Union, especially for such products like poultry, but also sugar, because if it don't have any kind of agreement after 6th of June, that will be really a huge problem for everybody. So, and especially for a country like Ukraine, which is in a war right now, a little bit more predictability for business would be really necessary. And that's what we do expect. We understand, of course, also the problems with Polish elections. We understand also the problems with European farmers. We understand actually everything, but also expect a little bit more understanding for our position in Ukraine, where we actually, during the last 3.5 years during the war, trying to do our best to protect our land, to protect our sector, and to protect our agriculture. And last year has shown that we actually done a quite good job despite all the problems we have. So many of Ukrainian companies have shown finally profitable business because the first 2 years of the war we were far away from the profitability. But that's exactly what we probably need also in 2025. So yeah, I wish all of us today a very nice discussion about the current status, about all the problems, and about all the issues we are going to discuss today. I wish all of us be wise enough to find solution with European Union, because European Union as our strategic partner in our strategic goal for Ukraine for agriculture, become the member of the European Union. And European Union right now for us is very important, especially because of the tensions with the United States, and the partnership with the United States is currently a little bit more difficult than before. So for us, it's very important to have a strong partnership with European Union. So thank you very much once again, and I wish all of us a very fruitful discussion today.
Alex, thank you very much for your, let's say, opening remarks. And definitely all of us are expecting for some resolution with the European Union and with the understanding of the future trade. And currently, we're wishing you a good trip. Okay, so with that, I return back to our discussion. The format is quite simple. Right now, we will start with the, let's say, presentation and the first words of our panelists. Again, the topic of our webinar today is how basically the EU market will fill without Ukrainian agri-food products on it. Whether it finally will be better, maybe for the EU producers, or maybe not. Let's figure out. We will have three main questions to discuss. First one is basically how self-sufficient is the EU in agri-food, and is external sourcing still structurally necessary? The second part would be about what role does Ukraine play in the EU's trade, not just economically, but also strategically and politically. And the third one, the most important out of all of this, what would a contraction in agri-food trade with Ukraine mean for EU consumers, prices, and also in long-term market stability? With that, I would like to invite Professor Martin Banze to show us his presentation and the results of his research. Martin, please, the floor is yours.
Alexandra, thank you very much. Also to Alex, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar, and I'm very pleased to show you some of our current analysis about the possible consequences or potential consequences of a return to a more protected situation. I prepared some slides, and I hope that we will. Do you see the presenters mode or the presentation mode?
Presentation.
The presentation.
You're good to go. Yes.
Okay, so I called my presentation "Challenges in Ukrainian Agri and EU Agri-Food Trade: Relevance of Trade Relation between the EU and Ukraine in a World of Disarray." There's one person on this front page here, which is very important. So it's the white elephant in the room, so to say, because this really makes it different if we now talk about a more restricted situation under the trade relationship between Ukraine and the European Union. Looking at the current or the recent developments, so the relative importance of trade with the Ukraine in the European Union, if you consider the intra-trade and the extra trade, the trade of the rest of the world, is, if you look at from a pure optical point of view, so rather marginal. So these tiny blue elements in here describe the contribution of the Ukraine in total on the total import side. So the exports to the Ukraine in agri-food, which is very important here. I only cover the agri-food trade here in the EU 27, does really not matter in this way. It's important to consider, if we're talking about trade of the European Union, that intra-trade is always the most relevant element. But if you look at the share of Ukrainian trade in third country trade. So it's from Comtrade, and the data for Comtrade is not fully covered for 24. So therefore, if you look at 23, it's 2% in exports and 7% in imports that comes from third countries into and out of the European Union. Looking at the development, sorry for this very complex graph, it shows similar to the previous slide, imports towards the European Union. Now we're looking at the bilateral trade relation between the EU and the Ukraine, and a split here into a very complex set of commodities. And we see that over the last 10, 20 years, there's a strong increasing in trade surplus of the Ukraine towards the European Union. So imports of Ukrainian products in the agri-food sector became especially over the last 5 years, more and more relevant. So over this in this period. So if we're looking at the different commodities that are entering the European market, it is clear that it is sugar, and it's the oilseed sector. So these blue ones here, and the gray ones, the coarse grain. Also, wheat became more and more important. But just a graphical illustration. We all know these numbers, but it's I think impressive to see how the bilateral EU-Ukrainian trade has developed in recent years. So what we did at Thünen, so we are running a couple of partial and general equilibrium models, and we did a scenario which I called the end of Article 29 in trade between the EU and the Ukraine, and these are tariffs, ad valorem tariffs, we introduce as let's call it the abolition of the provisions under Article 29 under this circumstance. It's important, Alexandra, you said in your introduction, the end of exports of the Ukraine, or the imports, looking from the EU side, imports from the Ukraine. So Ukraine imports will not disappear from European markets in that way, even under a situation where trade is now more protected or hindered between the European Union and the Ukraine. You see it here for certain commodities. If we return to a situation before the DCFTA, we still keep, for certain commodities, especially when it comes to oilseeds and vegetable oil, the trade import tariffs of the European Union towards the Ukraine at 0 level. So this is our assumption. We can discuss about the assumption, but especially when it comes to poultry meat, and to pork and to wheat, and to sugar. So the current 0 tariff is increasing towards a situation we have assumed in this scenario at these levels. So the impact of an end of DCFTA Article 29 should be recalled also in the background of the current trade conflicts at global level. And so what we have done at the Thünen Institute, we have considered these announced tariffs of the Trump administration in a reference situation. So in the base situation, we have the full-fledged trade conflict with the US in trade between trade partners, and so the rest of the world, including the EU and the US, according to the tariffs that has been currently set out for 90 days, but we assumed them in our scenario. So the reference is already the world in disarray, with a trade war or the trade conflict between the rest of the world and the United States. Under this reference, we have a free access of Ukrainian imports to the EU market. So this is the reference. And then the so the policy scenario is what I call the end of DCFTA Article 29. under the assumption of tariffs I just introduced in my previous slide. So the EU imposes a tariff on agri-food imports from the Ukraine, and here this is a freshly done scenario we calculated over the last days here at Thünen. You see the decline in imports at global level, so total imports, and you always have in these models, in these bilateral trade models, so a trade redirection effect, or normally we call, if we run it under free trade, a trade creation effect. Here it's sozusagen a trade decline effect. These are covered in these blue bars here. So a strong decline in Ukrainian exports, or other way around, imports entering the EU market. There's a slight compensation because the imports from other countries will increase a little bit, and so the resulting so the total imports, especially for wheat, decline. And then there is a lot of nothing here for other commodities, but when it comes to poultry meat, you see also a decline in imports from the Ukraine, a slight compensation from redirection from increasing imports, and a decline in imports for poultry meat in the European Union. So what does that mean for the Ukraine? Now we are looking the other way around. So the exports of the Ukraine, how does the Ukraine react in such a situation, which is also covered in our model? And here I would like to show you in one example, which I think is pretty convincing. So under an increase in trade protection or situation, so the exports to the EU, I've shown them from the other side, are strongly declining. However, compensated to a redirection to other destinations, so that with these increasing protection from the EU side, so total wheat exports leaving the Ukraine will decline about 240 million US dollar. This compensation, I would say, so the redirection does not take place in that way for poultry meat. So maybe it is also based to the fact that wheat is a more homogeneous good compared to poultry. So this effect to entering new market in an instantaneous way under this situation is not the case for poultry meat for Ukraine. So this might be also some things worth to be discussed. Change in production. Here it is relative to the base. I always show you million US dollars. If you look at the relative changes, these are rather small, but just in absolute terms, you see that the European Union has a slight incentive to increase wheat production, while wheat production in the Ukraine declines a little bit. Same is with poultry meat. It's interesting that for pork, it's the other way around. So pork, there's a slight increase in production. Keep in mind, so the tariff for pork imports is rather small in Ukraine. In total, so there is a decline in the Ukraine by a little bit more than 100 million US dollars, while also in total EU production in agriculture and food commodities declines a little bit. If you look at the general impact in GDP, I don't show it here, it becomes clear that protection does not only hurt the Ukraine in this sense, and it also hurts the EU. So imposing tariffs let your own welfare or income decline. In absolute terms, it is rather small, but in absolute terms, the EU will lose more income compared to the Ukraine under this higher tariffs if we abolish the current way the DCFTA is implemented. So this is my short introduction with a very clear statement. These are first results. And in case of further question, please contact me by email. Thank you very much.
Martin, thank you very much. I would like you all not to get the presentation off the screen, but you just did.
Sorry.
Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. The few things I'd like to also maybe add an extra attention to them. First and foremost, you said that the data was taken in 2023, right? This is the base for the model. And 2024 was not included, and which is even, I think, will be more interesting for you to see how the 2024 changed, because basically this is the year when Odessa seaport started to work.
Yeah.
Therefore, the pressure on the EU market with Ukrainian cereals completely decreased. Not completely, okay, decreased.
Yeah.
However, the start of work of Odessa seaport did not bring containers and refrigerators to Ukraine in that amount that will actually help Ukraine to return to the traditional markets. And apparently, this is the story with the poultry meat in this case, because if wheat can be exported through Odessa, poultry and other, we call them semi-packed or finished products, they cannot easily enter their traditional markets because of this. What also is very nice for me to hear is that not just Ukraine is a one big elephant in the room, but also some other person can be that much important for the EU right now. Okay. With that in mind, I think that would be great to move to the presentation of Alphonse, because they're also a bit of a connected. I will definitely keep the let's say thesis that the protection of the EU market will not just have an influence on Ukraine, but also will influence the EU market. And with that, Alphonse, please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Do you see my slides? Okay. Yeah, thank you also for the invitation and the opportunity to contribute to this webinar. I would like to discuss a couple of theses which build also on what has been presented by Martin Banse, saying, okay, there are a couple of products which are affected, but in the end, eventually, it is not that a big issue. And I wonder whether we really discuss the right questions with regard to EU and Ukraine trade issues. And more precisely, I would like to discuss, on the one hand, whether we look at agri-food in the right way, just looking at what is relevant to farmers. Rather, eventually, we should also look at consumers, even within the EU, which need competition and which suffered eventually a lot from the inflation starting already in 2021. We are also always discussing about poor EU farmers. I suppose EU farmers and EU agriculture can substantially increase efficiency. Another point is EU farmers still benefit from the war and the current conditions. And the last point, when talking about competition, we talk always about international trade, but the real competition of EU farmers is locally between them and their neighbors. And I would like to illustrate that a little bit. Let me start with a broader view. The agri-food chain is much more than agriculture, and we have many sectors up and downstream. We have the banking. Currently, we are preparing for EBRD a study on these issues. And when talking about EU-Ukraine agri-food trade, we have to be aware of many other issues which are very relevant. That's related to finance, also sustainability issues, green finance, green investments. We have to talk about digitalization. In some parts, Ukrainian agriculture is a front runner of agriculture digitalization. And the question sometimes is, what can we learn from them in the EU? I will not go into all these details. A second point, which I mentioned already, is that European consumers suffered a lot from inflation in recent years, and particularly from increasing food prices. And that affects particularly poorer households, which are spending large shares of their income on food and also on energy. But if you look at this figure from the European Central Bank, you see that since 2021, the food prices increased far faster and more than most other prices, partly together with the energy. The next point is related to, what can agriculture, EU agriculture, also contribute to more efficiency in the food chain. And in the Draghi paper, and also in the strategic dialogue on the future of EU agriculture, you find a lot referring to we need higher productivity. And if you look at, for example, German family farms and their productivity, then you see that those who are substantially above average productivity are very profitable. And it is not appropriate to talk always about the suffering EU farmers. Most of the production is coming from farms, for example, in Germany, which are not only very productive, but which are also very profitable. And that applies to all farms. You find the same figures in the groups of the arable farms, and you find the same also in the group of dairy cattle farms or the pigs and poultry farms. There are huge differences across farms, and you can find these figures for every year. This is just these are just numbers from the last year. You always see the profitable farms are substantially above average productivity, and you can do very profitable farming in agriculture in the EU. And since the last couple of years, EU farmers, German farmers, are on almost record high levels of profitability. They profited a lot from the inflation, and it is quite strange that we had in recent years these farmers protests, because the average numbers do not show that, for example, German farmers are currently suffering low incomes. A last point I mentioned already, we always discuss about the competition of EU farmers with Ukrainian farmers, but actually what you see even in recent years, with also increasing interest rates in the EU, land sales prices for agricultural area in Germany are still increasing and are at record high levels, and that despite of high interest rates as well. And another issue which is upcoming and which will also affect EU agriculture is that there will be an increasing labor scarcity, which already affects now investments in EU agriculture. And the question is, should the EU still focus that much on securing jobs in agriculture, but rather focusing on how to use the declining labor force in the most efficient way? And that means to rather support those sectors which use the labor in the most efficient way. That are my points, and we can discuss that in more detail in the discussion later.
Hans, thank you very much for the presentation. You know, I'm right now in between already asking questions connected to two of the presentations, or wait a bit to Oleg's presentation and then cover them all. But I'm doing my best to keep all the questions I have in my head all together written down, so I can ask them later. With this, I can only ask Alec to join the group and also to show the slides from his side.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alexandra. I will share my slides. Hopefully you can see them.
Yep.
Yeah, great. Stop subtitles. Yes, I think you can. Yeah, that's right mode. Yeah, I would like in my turn, so to say, I would like to echo a little bit to what already Martin and Alphonse said, but with probably more evidence from the work that we've done with the colleagues from other institutions. And but first, I'd like to sort of focus also. I think we always have to bear in mind, the importance of agriculture to Ukraine in this discussion, because that's also kind of very much important from various perspectives, from the perspective of economic capacity of Ukraine to fight Russia, and then to develop further and to basically rely less on foreign help. Let's put it that way, because the more Ukraine is economically powerful, the less we would be rely on external help. And from this perspective, agriculture is the key thing to consider, because if you look at the Ukrainian economy, I think about more than 20% of the income that we generate in Ukraine is linked to agriculture, primary agriculture, then food processing, and agricultural input supply. That's all kind of more than 20%. But moreover, more than 60% of total Ukrainian exports are agricultural products. So 60%, and more than half of this 60% is basically trade with European Union. That's why European Union is so much important for Ukraine in terms of kind of economic development and resilience and capacity to develop. But also from the other side, this is related to the current recovery and reconstruction needs that we have, like more than 500 billion US dollars, right? So to the entire economy, basically. And this is 3 times more than projected GDP. That means, we need lots of resources, domestic resources, and the help from external partners and from the friends to develop. And in this particular thing, you see that how the trade and agriculture, basically in particular, is important to withstand the hurdles that we have right now. So if you look at the trade structure with Ukraine, between Ukraine and European Union, we see that basically what Ukraine exports to European Union is actually agricultural goods, right? So that so this is so the agricultural goods, they dominate Ukrainian exports, while European Union basically imports to Ukraine non-agricultural food, right? So basically, this is kind of the balance. So there is kind of differentiated, so to say, trade between Ukraine and the European Union. So just to add to what Alphonse already said, that it's really good to consider not just farmers but consumers. They are often neglected in the discussion with the in the trade dispute between Ukraine and the European Union. And this is quite important. So the food processors, so consumers, not just kind of regular consumers like consume from the shelf of the supermarkets, but also food processors, livestock industry, basically in the European Union, and this whole kind of environment that is benefiting from the trade with Ukraine, from export from Ukraine. And we were trying to to put that together, so the farmers, consumers, the processors, and in the framework of the model, the general equilibrium model, GTAP, general equilibrium model, where we considered basically all the countries across the world. That work was done together with the colleagues from Colorado State University in the US. And we looked at if the European solidarity lane works well or not that well. So that means they're working in the limited, let's put it, capacity. So for us, it's kind of the strong European solidarity lane. This is sort of indicator of a free trade, while limited, it's sort of basically it stands for the name. So this is kind of limited, right? So this limit the restricted trade between Ukraine and European Union. And there are some parameters that you see on the slide, but the main outcome of this, so again, just to repeat, here we consider everybody, all the actors together, consumers, producers, the governments. So what we have is that if we have a weak European solidarity lane, that means that this is really a big blow to Ukraine in terms of incomes, to the GDP and welfare. European Union or Europe doesn't suffer that much. It's sort of really the marginal effect. But when we consider the strong solidarity lane, that means the free trade, so kind of full capacity trade between Ukraine and European Union, we see that basically European Union gains and about $2 billion that probably not that much for for European Union overall, take into account the economic capacity and the power of European Union, but still the effect is there, and it shows evidently that it's really beneficial for the European Union overall. And I think this is sort of a good way to to look forward. And then also I would like to focus on two sectors that are probably relevant in Ukraine and European Union discussion, which are sugar and dairy sectors. And specifically, I will start from the sugar. So the sugar imports increased substantially since the beginning of the Russian invasion, because of the free trade regime, because of the European solidarity lanes, right? But what actually happened during that time? So it's kind of a summary of what actually happened. The prices in the European Union at that time increased substantially. So, and Ukrainian sugar at that time was like a helper, right? So the mitigator of the supply shock that the European Union suffered at that time, the mitigator of the price increase that the European Union had at that time. So that means, from the trade perspective, Ukrainian food, Ukrainian exports, and you see that on the graph. So you see this, piles. This is the export dynamics from Ukraine, and the lines are basically the prices, and the black line is the price that was in the European Union at that time. So what that means is that freer trade allows to mitigate the shocks that are in particularly in the European Union more, in a better way, let's put it that way. So that means if there are shocks, then the free trade with Ukraine or with other countries can really mitigate the shocks. And this is also where the benefits are coming to consumers in particular. So that's one thing, trade with Ukraine is important, not just for Ukraine, but also for European Union in terms of welfare effects, but also in terms of mitigating the potential supply shocks that might come in European Union in one way or another. And another thing is dairy sector. And from this chapter, from this, the figures, so the dairy sector in Ukraine is kind of developing, right? It might not develop the way we want it, but still it's kind of developing, it's gaining its efficiency. There are some supply problems are in Ukraine, but still, if you look at the trade in dairy products between Ukraine and European Union, you see that the structure of this trade is really different. So what we export to European Union is not actually what European Union imports to Ukraine, right? So the structures, even the colors. So the colors on the, if you don't look carefully at the product names, I mean, the colors can tell you a lot about this. So the colors are different in terms of what we export and what European Union exports, and why basically there is a drop in the imports from European Union to Ukraine since 2022. I mean, it's evident, right? So because about 80 million people actually left the country, and this is kind of a drop in the demand that we had at the time. So that could be explained by that, by the development. But then again, I would like to emphasize that the structure in terms of dairy sectors trade is completely different, and that also reflects why dairy export increased to Ukraine on a free trade basis. It's basically because this stuff is demanded in Ukraine. So nobody forces European Union to buy this stuff, right? But that reflects that there is a demand, and then consumers, processors in European Union, they really sort of want this stuff to be consumed and to be bought from Ukraine. So basically, just to finish up with my part, European Union is a vital export market for Ukraine, not just for the development, but also for the current, for building up Ukrainian resilience, because we are so much dependent on the trade and especially on the trade with the European Union. Again, the more Ukraine is economically resilient, the less, help we would rely on. So in terms of kind of security, and the stronger partner you would have, the European Union would have on its eastern flank against Russia. So it's not just kind of agriculture, economic perspective, it's also a security perspective. I would put it that way. Security of the entire European Union. And there are evident economic benefits from more liberalized trade with Ukraine. And also, if you look at more detailed structure, sugar and the dairy, so there are other benefits like supply and price shocks mitigation, and also the revealed preferences and the structure, the trade structure between Ukraine and the European Union, in particular in dairy products. That was kind of one of the focus of my presentation. So I would be glad to answer the questions if there are any and continue discussion. Thank you very much.
Oh, there are, trust me. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I think with this, we can come to basically our open roundtable discussion, because, I've written down it all. So I can speak with you for hours and hours about that, but unfortunately we're limited with the time. But let's start. First and foremost, I'll be, like reflecting everything I saw, but also start speaking. Heinz, I also would like to invite you to the discussion, because you are very much important agricultural policy developer, if I can say so. So please feel free to join at any time you'd like to say. I'll be asking questions in the air, but I want you also to reflect and give your thoughts to that. First of all, from all the presentations we saw, the one big conclusion we can make is that EU exports a lot of non-agri-food products. Instead, Ukraine is exporting more agri-food products to the EU. From the presentation of Martin, there was also very good chart showing that Ukraine mostly exports raw materials. We said it was sugar, oil seeds, cereals. Meanwhile, EU exports to Ukraine added value products. One of the great examples is the dairy products that Oleg shows. The charts which are added value products, and as well as from the Martin's presentation, there was food preparation products, wine, drinks, and so on and so forth. Basically, in that case, can we say that Ukraine's part or Ukraine's role in the food market of the EU is the provision of raw materials? I need you to reflect on that.
Alexandra,
Martin, yeah.
Is that a question towards Heinz or to all of us?
To all of you, to all of
Okay,
you. Feel
yeah.
free to
Okay. Yeah, if I may, I forced myself to limit my presentation to 10 slides. We were currently talking only about the EU as an complete aggregate. And Alphonse already indicated the heterogeneity in German agriculture. If you compare that to the heterogeneity of EU agriculture, it becomes even more important. So if we talk about the imports from the Ukraine in terms of raw material, Alexander, and your impression is completely right. So the Ukraine contributes in terms of raw material exports, or looking from the European side, imports to a couple of very important Europe destinations within the European Union. So looking at member state level, it becomes even more, let's call it from an academic side, more complex, because there is no, I mean, looking at the aggregated self-sufficiency ratio of a couple of agricultural commodities, they are all between something like, in the lower cases, so 60%, but if you come, they are a little bit 100%. So European looks very self-sufficient at the aggregated level for most commodities in the agri-food sector. However, there are wild and huge differences looking at different sectors and different countries. One example is poultry. So we have countries in the European member states in the European Union. We have to mention Poland with 240% of self-sufficiency ratio in poultry. And if we now start to ship, and all know the protests of Polish farmers when the solidarity lanes start to throw cereals and oilseeds, bump it to the Polish markets, and they went through the roof with protests in Warsaw and also in eastern Poland. But looking at the details within Europe, within the European sector, it becomes very important to distinguish net exporting and net importing countries. And there are huge differences also in terms of efficiency between different sectors. So, and I could continue here with all other sectors, but I just wanted to mention this heterogeneity within the European single market. And this is a very important part where you see that Ukraine ships cereals and oilseeds to Spain and to other destinations, while neighboring country export the same commodities to third markets. So this is a relevant issue which we always have to take into consideration. And therefore, for single markets or for single countries, Ukraine imports are very, very relevant. It becomes even more relevant when you look at details within different member states. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks a lot. From that point where Ukraine is let's say Ukraine is an important player on the EU market, an important supporter of the EU food market, we come to the point of the prices, because what has already been mentioned is that since the war started, the prices increased. There was definitely some kind of story with unpredictability and lack of understanding how the situation would develop. But Alphonse mentioned that the prices are very high, and they as high as they ever been, leading to the point that EU farmers enjoy extra margin, which means that the increase in imports from Ukraine could actually stabilize this price for the final consumer, rather than keeping the price the highest, satisfying farmers, but rather making problems for the customers. How in that case, like, let's look from the perspective that Ukrainian products are restricted to the EU market. How in that case the prices again can react, and how, let's say, consumers, whether it be processors or final customers, can find themselves in the end. Alphonse, Oleg, I need you all in this discussion.
Oleg, would you like?
Okay, Oleg. Yeah.
No, I mean, from that perspective, I can only repeat what I told during my presentation, that free trade, irrespective whether this is Ukraine, European Union, other countries, it's kind of an insurance against supply shock. So it's kind of more integration of the markets of the two countries or two blocks leads to less severe shocks if this kind of appear, because we can mitigate a little bit in European Union, and European Union can sometimes mitigate what's going on in Ukraine. Because if you remember, during the first days of Russian aggression, European Union was really of good help because of imports, because of the supply chain broke in that time in Ukraine. That also kind of a sign that freer trade is better to the benefit of both partners. And sugar's case, at least from my perspective, was one of the evident and really great stories, I would say, during over the last couple of seasons.
Okay. Heinz, from your perspective as a policy advisor in this case, what could be, first let's start from the point that you saw how Poland and other member states entering the EU in 2004 and all the internal reactions again to the stories that Polish farmers will occupy the whole EU food market and that it will be more problematic for Germans and so on and so forth. From the policy perspective, how we can, let's say, come from the short-term to long-term perspective, bringing closer Ukrainian and EU agricultural sectors.
Yeah, thanks, Alexandra. So I was very carefully listening to the presentation. So thanks, colleagues. So I don't have a presentation, but I have to say that I talk on behalf of myself. I don't talk on behalf of my clients. So the advantage is that I can frankly speak about the issues that I find important. So I frankly believe that the European Union's agricultural sector will become stronger and more competitive with Ukraine. Yeah, so this is my assumption. Why is it the case? So there are a few trade-related issues, there are a few political issues, and a few competitiveness issues. So I very much like the statement of Alphonse that the agricultural sector is not only the farmers, you also have other stakeholders, the consumers and others. And we have to take that into consideration. But let me start. Yesterday I was looking at a few statistics, and we as agricultural economists, we look usually at trade statistics of agri-food products, but we should broaden our view. And looking at the EU exports to Ukraine, so all products, all services, is 42.8 billion euros into 2040. The Ukrainian exports to the EU are 24.5 billion euros. So it's about half of it. Yeah. So this is very, very dramatic increase in 24 of the trade deficit. So if you usually look at trade statistics, let's say, Martin, you showed the statistics last 20 years, then you see a dramatic increase of agri-food exports to the EU, but it is misleading if you don't look at the other trade components. And in 24, we have, let's say, this trade deficit. The trade deficit has to be covered by capital trade. Yeah, so you have this famous Trump argument that we have a trade deficit, the US has a trade deficit, we would like to bring it down. So it is now covered by capital inflow to the US. What we don't have at this moment is a capital inflow to Ukraine through investors. Yeah, so investors are not standing in the queue. So it has to be covered either by decreases of the trade or by capital flow from the EU or from EU governments. So that's very important to keep in mind. And the EU is doing a lot. So we have the Ukraine facility with 50 billion in 4 years. We have the military aid. But in agriculture, the political discussion, the narrative is completely misleading, because my point of view is that the EU is giving with one hand to Ukraine the military aid and the budget support and other things, and is taking away with the trade restrictions if we fall back to the DCFTA at the 6th of June, it takes away money from Ukraine. And I think that's from a policy perspective, it is not right. Because Ukraine is a country at war, is fighting for its own freedom. And if you think it through, Ukraine is not fighting only for herself, but for whole Europe. Yeah. It is, I think, highly questionable that the EU is not publishing the plans, what's happening after the 5th of June. So that's a political dimension. And what we know is that the Commission thinks for this year, we will then divide the year 25 by 12, multiply by 7, and then we are back by the DCFTA. And you know that the tariff rate quotas are very minimal. So this is the scenario for 25. We don't know yet what are the plans, the longer term plans of the European Commission, because there is nothing published yet. What we hear from insiders is that we will have safeguards. So we will have even more safeguard products than we have today. And so the European farmers are probably more important than the whole of Europe. Yeah, because from a political point of view, if you give in to the demands of the farmers in Europe, everywhere, then you say the farmers are more important than the whole economy of the EU nations and the whole EU. Yeah, and we have heard from our presentations that the benefits of trade are not only there for Ukraine but also for the EU. In some cases, even more for the EU. So what I think, what is behind of that, and that's another political issue, is that the European farmers are afraid of the CAP reforms that we need in Europe to make the European agriculture more competitive. We have not only competition problem, we have also competitiveness problem. The structure of the European agriculture in Southern Europe is so bad. The structure of the agriculture in Bavaria is so bad, but our politicians don't tell the farmers the truth. They are afraid of the political reaction. So that's a problem. So we need to tell farmers the truth that someday, most likely in 28, when we have the new budget cycle starting of the EU, 28 to 35 is a new budget cycle, and we need a change of the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy. And this needs to take into consideration the Ukraine accession. Yeah, Ukraine is an accession candidate country, and it will have most likely a pre-accession candidate status in 28, and there will be change. And if you talk to Ukrainian farmers, what they need most is, we would like to have market access. We are not really keen on your direct subsidies per hectare because we know we are competitive. If you talk to my relatives in Lower Saxony, farmers, and they say, no, for us, most important are the direct subsidies. Yeah, because this is 30 to 40% of my profits. Yeah, so that's the reality in Europe. So I very much hope that we will have policymakers in Europe that look at these issues, and that we would not only have agricultural ministers who look at the sector and the farmers only, but that we will have policymakers who look at the whole picture in Europe, and the whole picture includes, of course, Ukraine. Ukraine is part of Europe. It's part of the European security architecture, and it will be part of the European Common Agricultural Policy one day, which will have less direct subsidies and more competition. And this is good for everyone. Yeah, there are a few losers, of course, but it was good for everyone. And I'm still waiting for the European policymakers, whether it's Macron or Merz or others or Tusk, that they will have the courage to tell the people the truth. The problem that we have is with Tusk government, he has farmers associations in his government. The problem with Merz is he has the Bavarian Farmers Association in his government. The problem is with Macron that he has the French wheat farmers in his government. So that's a bit the political dimension. From a rational economic point of view, the situation is very, very clear. But the problem is the political debate. The political debate is dominated by false narratives today. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Probably a bit too long, but I'm very motivated to talk about this.
Completely
but
fine,
very
Heinz. Thanks a
important.
lot. Yeah, but you took the political dimension to all the figures and balance discussion. Alphonse, I see you raised the hand, but also as you would like to comment something or reflect, I wanted to ask, okay, so apparently it doesn't look that the situation for the European farmers will change that much, whether the Ukrainian products will be restricted with the access to the EU market or not. Am I correct in understanding that?
Yes, the situation will not change that much, but that has been shown by Martin. So surely one can or let's say the other way around. EU agriculture would not benefit a lot when European farmers produce more wheat. Because we anyway have already high shares of wheat and we need much more crop rotation. One could say, okay, it would be better to have more other products, including, for example, soybeans in our production. So there would be some more competition with Ukraine in the field of the oilseeds, for example. But the key point which has been mentioned by Heinz, and that relates also to what I said before, we are following here crazy narratives of poor farmers, of the problem of Ukrainian imports. We have to be aware that there are some 6 million additional consumers from Ukraine currently within the EU consuming food. Eventually, that is not much less than what is imported from Ukraine. Even it is maybe much more. This issue of the narrative, we have to thank you very much that you raise these points because that is not in the public agenda. Currently, farmers are protesting against a high bureaucracy, for example, in the EU, and now everybody is saying, okay, we have to reduce bureaucracy. But even here, we eventually can learn from Ukraine or collaborate on for example, testing alternatives for more sustainable agriculture. You have now a couple of large farms engaged in sustainability reporting. And we can check what can we learn from this style of reporting instead of sending people to every farm to control whether they are doing this and that in the right way. So Ukraine could be a kind of regulatory sandbox also with regard to solving some EU problems in a smart way. And we should also not forget that also our agricultural industry, which is producing machines, benefits from the opportunity to export, not only by exporting goods to Ukraine, but to test most modern machinery in Ukraine. That are all benefits which you should address much more in the public debates, because that is also important for the development of our own agricultural sector. And as I said before, there are many areas where there are benefits from the EU, from exchanging agricultural products, but also particularly technology with Ukraine?
Okay, from the discussion of the short term, we have already moved to the discussion of the longer term perspective, and like how, let's say, both sectors can develop all together in the future. Oleg, you raised your hand first, so please feel free to reflect.
Yeah, it's just kind of a question to everybody, and just to think about, because as Heinz mentioned that, and we sort of understand that this is more like a political issue than economics, right? Because economics is quite clear, at least from today's presentation and from kind of general conceptual point of view. So if this is a political issue, my question is, or like to discuss is, why consumers in European Union so much quiet on that? Because farmers are really vocal on that, so we see them on the streets. But consumers, in particular, I'm not saying about the ordinary consumers, but about the powerful consumers like food processors, livestock industry. Why are they not so much vocal? I know that UCAB is doing a little bit on that, just to raise this awareness from the food processing point of view. There was some, discussion in the European Parliament. But overall, why this is happening? What's the problem with consumers in the European Union? It's just a question also to myself and to you. Maybe you also were thinking about that, and what would be the remedy to raise this awareness and to make them more like politically vocal and pressing the Brussels?
Martin, before you jump in, I'd like to maybe, like a spoiler, I think one of the answers would be in heterogeneity of the European Union. And that's me stealing the phrase from Martin. Martin, please, maybe you have something to reflect on.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much, Heinz, for your contribution. I had in mind to also show the trade in the non-agriculture and food products, but that would overblow my amount of slides I have in mind. And thank you very much also in looking at these from a political angle, which is so important. So I started my academic career as a young doctoral, as a PhD student, looking at the consequences of an EU enlargement to the East European or Central European countries, and there was Alan Buckwell and Stefan Tangermann who putting this place. Why will farmers from Poland, from Romania, from Bulgaria love the CAP? Because of the direct payment. So from that political point of view, we need the Ukrainian farmers to change the CAP. So I think it's the only way to get rid of the current way direct payments are given to EU farmers, because with the enlargement towards the Ukraine, this payment would explode in a way that this policy cannot be financed anymore. So I hope, and therefore we really have to work on that Ukraine will join the European Union to really get an angle in this political debate to change this policy, because otherwise the current situation, Heinz, you have described it with the new government here in Germany. There was a statement of the new chancellor. I don't see that from Germany there will be no initiative to change this policy in the European Union, that we lower direct payment or phase out direct payment and redirect it in a more efficient way. So from that point of view, thank you very much for this debate. And Oleg, coming back to your statement, why are European consumers so quiet? Because they are not organized. Farmers are so well organized in Europe, also in Germany. So from that point of view, they need a couple of thousand tractors in Berlin to really have an impact on policy. They change policies, and I don't see any way that European consumers or German consumers are organized in a way that they protest to lower food inflation or to implement policy measures to bring food prices down again. And Alphonse already mentioned this, the weird narrative of poor farmers, which is, I think, I fully agree with him.
I feel like we have opened Pandora box. You know, Ukraine has already been blamed for all the problems of the EU farmers recently, and right now you will also be blamed that with us the whole cap and subsidy system will have to be changed, which is
No,
which
I
is a
don't
bit
blame
of a
it. Sorry,
challenge. No,
don't.
you,
I
not
don't
you.
blame it, but
Martin, not you, but be sure we are already prepared for the future blames that's because of Ukraine. The future cap might be changed, but not because the last week there was the the presentation of the vision of the European Commission on the future, let's say, of the agricultural sector of Europe. Also, one of the things that was discussed that the actually cap budget needs to be increased, because with the cap budget you can attract younger farmers, you can support the implementation of more sustainable measures into the agricultural sector. And I mean, you see from basically what economists say, that you need to change the perspective and you need to make more competitive, more efficient, and with them they will introduce the better, let's say, techniques and be more efficient in production. But well, from what we hear, the story is the other way around, because the EU will have to spend more funds in order to actually develop the agriculture of the EU. Okay, so in that case, you know, we have this, we are coming from the perspective of getting products to the EU market, because we saw that with more free access to the market, it's not only Ukraine that wins, it's also EU wins, right? Because they're the main customers, the processors. But right now we are moving closer to the point that we have two completely different agricultural sectors. And like how to make this marriage work in the future, and like on which rules it can be settled, that it's not going to be just Ukraine, it will be the enlarged EU who will in the end, I don't know, benefit, produce more, export more, and like how the trade balance itself, how it will change. Because as of now it does not seem very stabilized, let's say, in our discussion. Okay, so I think in this case we also need to move again to policy development. And like how, again, Heinz, you saw how Poland was entering the EU, you saw how the CAP was developing, and in that case how then Ukraine can join and all this discussion can start or maybe develop.
Yeah, I think many of us reform-minded colleagues, reform-minded stakeholder groups, I think they look at Ukraine and they would like to see in Ukraine the right steps that makes the accession feasible, because it will support the CAP reform here in the EU. So, and this is really heavy lifting. But what I see in Ukraine is a lot of goodwill and commitment. I was involved in 23, 24 in harmonizing the strategy, the agriculture and rural development strategy of Ukraine with the EU. There is the 2030 strategy now adopted by the government in December 24. It includes rural development, it includes green areas. It is very near to the strategic plans of EU member states. This is a good development. Based on that, we have the action plan now. The action plan is almost ready. And in the action plan, you have very detailed areas where Ukraine is reforming the sector, the regulations, to harmonize it with the acquis communautaire, all the regulations of the EU. This is good development. The faster that goes, the more we have a chance to change the EU cap. Yeah, so this is related. If Ukraine makes good success during the next 2 years till the end of 27 and is reaching the pre-accession status, the so-called PSA status, then it will have access to more funds of the EU, but it will also have a real accession perspective from the period 28 to 35. So that someday there is an option that Ukraine becomes a member of the EU. And looking at the 2004 accession of Poland and Romania and 8 Eastern European countries, where I worked in Warsaw with people who couldn't believe that EU would be ready to take them. Yeah, so I remember that the decision makers in the Ministry of Agriculture in Warsaw, they couldn't believe that the EU would be ready to take them on board. Yeah, the same discussions we had, like we have now with Ukraine. The Polish agriculture sector is too big. The Romanian agricultural sector is too big. This is too costly. And the European labor markets will be flooded by Polish people and Romanian people. Yeah, so this argument is not so relevant today, but the argument is of the cost is also relevant. And my argumentation, my reasoning is that even with today's subsidies for Ukraine, it is cheaper than the war. Yeah, the war support, what the EU is delivering to Ukraine, costs a lot of money. This is military support. It's also Ukraine facility. The Ukraine facility is 50 billion about in 4 years. It's per year 12 billion. Plus the military support gives us easily 20. So if we would support, let's say, 30 million hectares of land with 200 euros per hectare, we would have roughly 12 billion, plus the rural and structural funds would give us about 15 billion. The real cost of the EU accession, and that's much lower than the actual cost we have during the war. And then if we consider the change of the cap, so reducing the direct subsidies per hectare, have transition periods. So in Poland and Romania, we had transition periods of 7 years before Polish farmers received the same than their German and French counterparts. So the accession is feasible. Agriculture is not a constraint, and this we have to tell the European farmers associations, and we have to tell this the European governments, the national governments, so that they will have it more difficult to tell us a narrative. The Ukraine is too big, the agricultural sector is too big, they produce too much. It's a country of oligarchs, and you don't have the rule of law, and you don't have the acquis there. Yeah, so we know all the arguments. So what I want to say, we have to work in the EU to support the case, and we also have to support Ukraine to, as fast as possible, to adopt the standards and the acquis and everything, because it's important for both sides.
Thanks a lot, Heinz. We already getting closer to the point of final Q&As and for the closing remarks. I think we've covered some of the questions I've received in the online registration part, and also from here what I see in the chat. What I can definitely say, okay, we are very much close to the 6th of June. Right now, there is no final resolution to the situation we are in. That's for sure. Otherwise, we would already discuss how the proposed scenario from the European Commission would influence both the EU and Ukraine. But right now, we're discussing in general terms how important Ukraine is for the EU market and vice versa. Meanwhile, I need your maybe last thoughts or last, let's say, messages on how extra we can influence the EU stakeholders, including processors and maybe even farmers, how extra we can influence, what do extra we need to tell that Ukraine is not a threat, it is actually a support to the EU balance sheet, and not just to the balance sheet, but also for the trade, let's say, facilities, right, and capacities to expand and develop in the future. Let's start from Martin.
Yeah, I think showing the outcome of our first analysis, looking at the detail, how Ukraine contributes to markets, to food supply, especially in those markets where we have a net import situation in different countries in the European Union, will really bring the discussion on a better ground and a better basement, so that we get the emotions out of the debate in that way, that we do not have this like the Ukrainian agriculture like a shadow over the agriculture and food sectors in Europe. And here I think it's very important to have connections, especially to the processing industry in Europe, because they heavily depend on a constant inflow of raw materials, especially when it comes to vegetable oil, when it comes to poultry meat, and so on. So from that point of view, I would be very much interested in also in next steps of this analysis, and having an exchange with you in that way to contribute to this debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Oleg?
As I again mentioned, since this is the political issue, pure political issue, then it's good when it would be good to tackle exactly kind of the other side of this game, of this story. And as Martin mentioned, that this would be processors, and actually UCAP is doing that. Other, I think, farmers group in Ukraine, they're also doing that. Not sure that this is going to be kind of enough to lobby for continuation of the free trade agreement with the Ukraine. But still, this is a good effort that worth doing, and it's great that you're doing. But other than that, maybe on the government level, on the political level, but I'm not sure. I know I'm not there, so I cannot tell you about the dynamics there. Yes, and I think that I mean, since we are representatives of academia, I think that on our level, we also have to do our best in terms of disseminating what we are actually doing and what we are sort of have to do, because this is our not just kind of academic role, but it's also our social responsibility. So take it not just kind of your professional, but also more than that. And the more we can do that, the better.
Thank you. Alphonse?
Yeah, there are media representatives also in the list of participants. We have to clearly state that the main beneficiary of the zero tariff policy are European consumers, the European business, and we all benefit from the current zero tariff policy, and we should hope that that will be continued also in the interest of the EU. And we should really reflect also on what we've learned, and it has been mentioned by Martin, from the EU enlargement in the early 2000, 20 years ago. Since then, the German food industry has increased the number of jobs by 100,000 persons, particularly driven by increasing intra-EU food trade. And the opposite happened from what was originally expected, that the new member states flooded the old EU with their products. No, we flood their supermarkets with our products, and we should rather care about Ukrainian markets, because the high value products are also produced here, and that's not that's on the one hand the food side, but also it's the input side, all the machinery you invest, you even buy now during times of war from the EU.
Thank you, Heinz.
No, I think you do the right things already at UCAB. So there are three areas I think that's important. The one is to have a rational assessment. And with Martin, Oleg, Alphonse, I think you have some of the reform-minded, rational scientists who can support you just for to have a basis for the discussion. And so that's number one. And then you need for the dialogue, you need to find the right stakeholders, the right allies. You did this in the European Parliament with the liberal fraction. So my friends, the political side in the European Parliament, I think that's very important to have the right allies, to find the political support on the European side. The benefit, the food industry and the feed industry and the biofuels industry, they benefit of the Ukrainian trade today. They are not so loud as the European farmers, but they have also lobby groups. They have also associations, and I think you and Nazar in the EU, you started to involve them in the discussion so that they can also talk to their government, the national governments, to stimulate a rational discussion. They say we need the Ukrainians because it's for our benefit. Yeah? So we have effects on prices, price stabilization. We have effects on our business. We have effects to reduce inflation. So that's usually very, very important, so that the lobbyists go to the policy and lawmakers. I know this quite well from Berlin now, how this is functioning. And then the minister in Berlin, he goes to the European Council. And don't think that the European Commission is the most important thing in Brussels. It's the Council. Yeah, so the national governments send their agricultural ministers, and they decide on these issues. And the European Commission is then trying to find compromises. They have 27 countries. They have to find ways and means to compromise. So we also have to influence the national governments in a way. And the best way is they listen to their business lobby groups. Yeah, so they listen more to the business lobby groups than to us. Yeah, because we are not representing an economy or the company.
You're not lobby groups. You're not lobby groups, but I mean, your credentials speak way much loud. Yeah, well,
we are
but
independent,
still,
but we are
living,
Alexandra, we are living in times where narratives matter, and the truth doesn't matter anymore. So it is also important that you have the narratives right. And we know from the Kremlin now for the last 10, 15 years, it doesn't matter what is the truth. So in previous times during the Soviet Union, there was pravda. Yeah, so we knew always what is the truth. But even if we look at truth social, yeah, or X, that's not the truth. Yeah, so we have to come up with narratives. And I think in Ukraine, you do the right things. I mentioned the commitment of the government to harmonize the acquis. The private sector is doing even more. The private sector is always more advanced when it comes to standards approximation. So I think you are doing the right things, and I can also only congratulate you to have this office in Brussels. Keep the good relations and connections to national stakeholders who can help you. In Germany, you have traditionally good connections, but there may be probably more countries who can influence politics. Poland is very difficult, but after the presidential elections, the 1st of June, yeah, they will have the new president elected. The 2nd of June, you will have a chance to talk to the Polish stakeholders again. So that's how I see this. So this is economics. Economics matter. The rational assessment of the situation matters. But then it comes to politics, and politics is no longer rational. Politics is so weird today. It is narratives and narratives and narratives.
And we still need to work in that. Thank you very much for your conclusion words, and I'd like to thank you for your participation today. I'm very much grateful that you agreed to be part of this online webinar. With this, I would like to invite our president, Alex Lisica, to say the final words.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. That was really a very nice event. I enjoyed it so much that I decided actually to go from the Polish border to Hungary in Bonn, because Polish border was very busy, and it looked like I have to wait about 8 hours, and that was kind of problem. So I said, okay, I go to Hungary and France, and we will see what's going to happen here. So anyway, I enjoyed very much all the topics which were covered professionally, and a real diversity, and a topic which has mentioned Martin are extremely important in terms of understanding how important is actually Ukrainian agriculture for the European Union, but not only for today, but also for the future common agriculture policy. And I think that's exactly what we have to underline in the future discussions, that for the European farmers, for European policy, for European agriculture business and food business, is a Ukrainian access to European Union is a chance. It's not a problem, is a chance. And that's, I think, also chance in terms of that what Alphonse said, that if we talk about agriculture in a modern world, we are talking not only about the food, we're talking about complex stuff which is covered by the agriculture. And I think Ukraine is the best way how to be modern agriculture, with a huge contribution of the IT solutions, which are huge contributions of the different types of supply chain, which are in Ukraine partly more efficient than in Europe. So that can be actually not one-way street for both countries, but also kind of a real know-how exchange, and I think that can be really a nice story. And I do agree also with Heinz that that the current policy, unfortunately, are also narratives, and only narratives. And if you read right now the news from Mr. Trump about the meeting in Istanbul, then unfortunately you'll understand only one thing, that you understand nothing, because that's a kind of narratives, and you sometimes just think that the sentences of Mr. Trump in the social media were written somewhere else, because it's really not understandable. But he's a president of the United States, and we have to understand it and accept it. And I think that that's exactly the game change, kind of, also for the agriculture lobby, but also for agriculture business, that we should be more prepared for such kind of discussions with narratives, with social medias, and with, but probably our way would be to underline with professional discussions like that one today. So I'm really thankful to all the panelists, Martin, Alphonse, Oleg, and Heinz. Thank you very much. You have done a really great job. And a special thank, of course, to you, Alexandra. You are the really great moderator. You've done a great job. So you've covered all the topics which were extremely interesting for everybody. And that was very interesting event. And we have had today more than 100 participants. And I think for such kind of topic, trade between Ukraine and European Union, online as a kind of good result. So thank you very much, and I wish all of you, of us, a great success in the future. And we are going to inform you of our next webinar as soon as possible, but believe me, that will be somewhere beginning of June, where we probably know what's going to happen with the new trade mechanism between Ukraine and European Union. Thank you very much to all the panelists, and thank you very much to all the participants for interesting questions and interesting discussion. And I am pretty sure that we're going to continue such kind of great event. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for the nice words. I tried to do my best. Okay, with that, we'd like to thank you for taking part and listening to our 10th online discussion. Thanks for panelists. Thanks for attendees. See you soon and have a great day.